So thank you very much, all of you, for joining. I'll share my screen to start the presentation. So I hope you can see my PowerPoint. And as you can see, today we are going to talk about workshop module. And the agenda for today is, as I always start with a little bit of pedagogical indoctrination. So I'll give a brief teaser about peer evaluation. What is it and why is it important? And then I'll leave you to discover more about it by Googling or reading some articles, or maybe you are already doing it. But just to set the context for this workshop module, because it is very effective as a peer evaluation tool in Moodle or in an online teaching and learning situation. So this brief teaser will be there. Then I'll introduce the workshop module. What are the features, right? The different stages to set it up. And finally, I'll try to show you how it works for students. During the course of all these, I'll be switching my screen, different windows, logging in and logging out into Moodle, uh, changing my role from teacher to student. So please bear with me for that. Without that, it will not be possible. So starting with the peer evaluation, and different names are used. It's called peer assessment. It's also called peer reflection, peer review, peer evaluation, peer editing. Though peer editing, I take it as a little superficial compared to the other forms of it, that is assessment, reflection, review, evaluation, and feedback. Because editing, depending on how you engage your students in editing, it can just the student can just resort to correcting each other's grammatical and spelling mistakes rather than deeply engaging with the work of their peers. So for this presentation, we will use assessment, reflection, review, evaluation, feedback, rather than mere editing. Though at times, for example, Rosa and me, we may need a lot of editing to engage our students in a lot of editing also. So peer assessment, what's the importance of peer assessment? And for that, I'll quote, rather I'll read a longish quote from Delanne William. He's a British educationalist and emeritus professor of education, educational assessment at UCL, Institute of Education. Maybe Salim knows him or has come across him somewhere. So I'll read, as I said, a longish quote of Delanne William, and you can also read it for yourself from the screen. So he says, now when we talk about peer assessment, a lot of people just assume we are talking about having students marking each other's work so that the teacher doesn't have to do it, and people always get the wrong idea because that's summative peer assessment. So it's not because you're escaping looking at your students' work, you don't have time, sometimes we feel lazy, so we ask the students to do it. Rather, there's a purpose. It's a purposeful activity if done in the right way. That's what the first sentence means. So what we have discovered is that formative peer assessment, where students are helping each other improve their work, has benefits for the person that receives feedback, but also has benefits for the person who gives the feedback. So it's not just a one-way process. It's a two-way process where the person who has done the work and the person who is evaluating or assessing or reviewing the work, there's benefit and advantage in terms of learning for both sides. So it's not just the reviewer giving some feedback to the one who did the work and only the one who did the work benefits from that. It's not that way. Because in thinking through what it is that this piece of work represents and what needs to happen to improve it, the students are forced to internalize a success criteria, and they're able to do it in the context of someone else's work, which is less emotionally charged than your own. I mean, by nature, we are all narcissists, and whenever we do some work, we consider it to be good, rather the best. And anybody saying anything about that work, we initially feel a little disturbed. Uh, for example, when I received my supervisor feedback for my master's thesis on the first two chapters, I was so disturbed I gave up writing for 20 days. After 20 days, then things started settling in, and then I realized after rereading and rereading that what she said was actually making some sense. So our immediate reaction to any assessment on our work uh, is, and obviously we cannot assess our own work ourselves the way others can do it. So that's what this means. So what we routinely see, we see very, very commonly is when students have given feedback to others about a piece of work, their own subsequent attempts at that same work are much improved because they are now much clearer about what good work in that task looks like. So the other day when I was sending the email, I mentioned critical thinking, and it develops critical thinking where you can see the pros and cons of what needs to be done in a work. So that's been one of the real, I think, breakthroughs is the real benefit of peer and self-assessment is both the person who is doing the assessment, the self-assessment, and the person who is giving feedback, the peer assessment. So the benefit for all parties. We see students being very, very effective commentators on each other's work, giving very, very sound advice, sometimes a lot harder than the teachers would give. One of the things you would see quite routinely in classrooms is children being much tougher on each other than the teacher who dare to be would dare to be because of the emotional relationships and power relationships there, but actually they are generally and pretty much spot on. So I always advocate trusting our students, and I always advocate that they are not blank, empty boxes. They come to us, to our classroom, with a lot of experience, with a lot of common sense, with a lot of and pretty well developed critical thinking. So if we trust them with certain tasks that we prefer to do, believe me, they do it better than us. And this is what exactly Dylan William is echoing here. So, as I said, just a brief introduction to peer assessment, peer evaluation, or peer reflection or review. So you can see the benefits here. It's not just for the one who's receiving the feedback, but the one who's giving the feedback. And then one good thing is that this feedback is always very accurate and to the point. So uh, owing to these advantages, it's always beneficial for us and for our students and for their learning to engage them in peer assessment, even if we do it as a sort of formative exercise rather than summative if we are too worried and too possessed about their grades, their summative grades. So as a formative assessment technique, it can really benefit the receiver as well as the giver. And for this in Moodle, we got this workshop module. Uh, so workshop module, it's one of the most complex tool. But when I say complex tool, it's not in terms of use, but in terms of function. Its function is multi-staged and multi-tiered. Uh, Unlike other activities where we just set up the activity and then there's an interaction by the student with that activity, this activity involves multiple stages of interaction. And this also shows us that peer assessment is also a complex process. And if the students are engaged purposefully and systematically and with proper guidance and coaching in this activity, they will benefit a lot from this. So don't be set off by this word complex. I said it's complex not in terms of use, but in terms of function. And even if it is complex in terms of use, once we start using it and once we start trying, it will become easier for us. So the interface is quite easy for the teacher as well as for the students to upload their assignments or do their work and present it for the peer review. It is designed so that the students' work can be submitted and offered for peer review within a structured framework. So you don't have to download anything. The students don't have to download anything. Once they do their assignment there or upload their assignment, then the whole process can be done within Moodle without downloading, getting papers or getting PDF copies or anything. And then workshops provide a process for both instructor and peer feedback. So the good thing is that you can remain engaged in this whole process as a teacher. There is a role for you, there is a role for your students, and everybody plays some part to make it successful. Then it's not just one type of assessment. You can use this tool, this workshop module, in a number of ways, in a number of activities. And as I was talking to Bernard before we started, that then it depends on your imagination, the teacherly imagination, how you use it. So now going to using the workshop module. So before you want to use it, please plan a little bit. It will take a little bit of planning, as you do for all other online activities. Those of you who are doing it, they know that no online activity can be successful without proper planning and then executing that plan while you are engaging your students in these activities. So there is, to all online activities, there's this element of design, and without design, nothing will be uh, sort of done properly by you and by students. So this planning is part of the design for this activity. So 4 important questions: what will you have each student do? So what kind of assignment they need to do? So you should be sure for that. You should plan. Then who will assess assignments? Is it going to be you, or the students will assess each other? And if the students are assessing each other, and as we said that this workshop module is basically for peer assessment, then who will assess whom? What will be the criteria of assigning a student to another student for assessment? Is it random? Is there a plan, a design, even in this assigning one student to another? Will you prefer students of same ability assessing each other, or you'd prefer some other kind of uh, sort of pairing and grouping? So that's important. That's important part of design, and that's important part of planning. And then how will the assignments be assessed? Do you have a criteria? What kind of criteria you and you want your students to apply to this peer assessment? Or you just give it to them and ask them to assess, and they can go in all directions. So it always better to have a plan, a criteria, and most of us are familiar with rubrics. So will you prefer to use some kind of, your students to use some kind of rubric or some kind of checklists or some other mechanism for assessing each other? And then when will students be allowed to submit their assignments and assessments? Uh, this is an important question, because if they need to submit their assignment and their assessment at the same time, it will not be a very productive activity. So I need to submit my assignment today, but in the evening, I also need to submit a peer assessment for another fellow student. So how much time I get between completing my assignment and then assessing a student will affect the quality of assessment. So be conscious of this fact that it's better to give them plenty time first to complete their assignment, and then also plenty of time to complete the assessment of their peers, if you want the activity to be meaningful for all of them. If there is less time or no time for assessment, then it will not work well for both sides. The assessor will do it in a hurry without going deeper into the work, or looking at the work or reviewing the work deeper level, at a deeper level, and it will lose the whole purpose of this activity. So these 4 important questions of design or planning before you create the activity. Then this workshop got basically 4 stages, and the first stage is the setup phase. The second one is the submission phase, when the students submit their work. In the first setup phase, you set up the workshop, you do your work as an administrator of the workshop and as a teacher of the workshop. Then the third phase is the assessment phase, where the students assess each other. And the fourth is the grading or the evaluation phase, where the students get their grades for submitting the assignment from their peers and also for assessing their peers. So the grade works both way. I get, for example, if I'm a student, I get a grade by my peers on my for my work, And at the same time, if I have reviewed or evaluated the work of my fellow student, I also get a grade for that. So in this way, this peer assessment can also be a graded activity. So it's not that I just get a grade for my work. I can also get a grade as a student for assessing somebody's work. So that is the advantage of this activity. So now let me move to Moodle and first deal with the technical part. That is how to set up this activity. And by doing this, I'm here at the first phase, that is setting up this workshop for my students, defining the parameters, defining the behavior. And as I said, it's the technical part. So let's first deal with the technical part, and then we can move and see how it works for the students. And while doing this technical part, I'll be dealing with a number of pedagogical questions and pedagogical techniques. So please pay attention to that. And if you have any question or any idea to share at that moment, please do share. Turn on your mic and just interfere and share your ideas with others also. Or maybe is something that you are doing in the classroom with your students and you want it to be applied to this online activity and you want to share it with others, or you want to ask if this can be done online or not. So please feel free, let it be interactive. Uh, Comments, suggestions, ideas, questions, all are welcome in the process. So as we always do, you cannot do anything on your course page. This is my course page unless your editing is on. So if it is off, as I did it now it is off and I cannot do anything. I cannot add anything. I cannot edit anything. So turn editing on. And once the editing is on, now I can edit and I can add activity. So I go to the usual first step of add an activity or resource, click here, and it takes me to the list of activities and resources, and I look for workshop. Workshop should be in the activities because it's interactive. It's not just a resource. So down here, I got workshop, click here and add. And as usual, it takes you to the form which you need to complete to determine its behavior and what it should do. So workshop name. So let's say, uh, just give it any name. So, right, let's call it computer analytics or something that you want to name. Maybe if you're doing an essay, you can name that essay. And if you want to be more precise, so peer evaluation, though there's no need for that. Then if you want to add description, you can add description. And if you don't want feel like typing, you can record yourself, audio record, or you can video record, and you can add that description here. Then we go to grading. So grade setting, grading strategy. There are 3 or 4 type of strategies that you can use. So accumulative grading, comments, number of errors, rubrics. So you can use either one of them, and I'll just give you a brief at this stage what these 4 strategies mean. And once we have set it up and we reach the grading level, then I'll show you more details how they act or how the students use them to peer review. So talking of the first one, that is accumulative grading strategy. So this grading strategy, the grade for each element is added to arrive at the cumulative grade. I talked about rubrics, so are a checklist. So let's say there are 5 checklists, 5 areas in the rubric, or 5 items in the checklist, and each of them has some grade. So the students grade the work based on that rubric, and finally it all adds to one final grade, and that is accumulative grading strategy. So this style of grading enables you to present the reviewer with a numeric scale, and you can also present the reviewer with yes or no questions. So there can be some statements, there can be a criteria, or there can be simply yes or no questions. For example, is there a title to this essay? If it is yes, it is 1 mark. If it is no, it is 0. Right? So that is what we mean by yes or no questions. So if that thing is done, yes, well, a grade. If that thing is not done, no, no grade. or maybe some partial grade. You can also use a grading scale of poor, fair, good, and excellent. And if you use yes or no grading scale, you will assign a point value to each. So make sure that whatever scale you use or whatever elements you use, put a grade there. Otherwise, just the word poor or just the word fair or just the word good doesn't mean anything to the student. So these words should be accompanied by some kind of point. So poor 1 point, fair 2 points, good 3 points, and excellent 4 points. And the same applies to yes or no. So that is a cumulative grading strategy. The second is simple comments as a grading strategy. So what the students need to do is to write a comment on the quality of that work, right? So they comment on the work. There may not be any grade, there may not be any scale, there may not be uh, yes or no or any kind of poor or these things. The students just write comment there. It can be subjective comment, or it can be just how they felt about that work, or it can be some feedback for improvement. So it's up to you how you guide your students, what kind of comment you ask them to provide, and then they follow these instructions. Or maybe you can give them some models of comments, and then they using those models, then they produce their own comments on the work of the students. So this is the second grading strategy, comment. The third one is number of errors options. So errors options is simple yes or no questions. Is there a title? If yes, then the students choose yes, and if there's no title, then the students choose no, right? And if it is yes, then the work gets some grade for that, some reward for that, and if it is no, then they don't get any reward for that. The yes or no questions, you need to create them. So for example, this question, is there a title? I need to create it, and then there will be two options, yes or no. Uh, so don't leave it to the students to create their own questions, because you need it to be structured. You need a framework to be there, and that framework needs to be applied. If you leave it open to the students, they may come up with different kind of questions. They may come up with different kind of ideas. So obviously, because it's after all an assessment, so there needs to be a framework for all, which all apply in the same way. So I give an example. Is there a title? Yes or no? Are there 5 paragraphs in the assignment? Yes or no? Uh, each paragraph has some statistics. Yes or no? So these will be the number of errors, right? If it is no, then it's an error. It needs to be corrected. And if it is yes, then the work is meeting the standard. Now, when you are setting up this criteria, these questions, yes or no questions for your students, they can be subjective, where things depend on the student's personal opinion, or they can be objective, where things are judged objectively, and the students need to follow an objective criteria rather than just coming up with subjective opinion in form of yes or no. So it will be a very subjective questions. If I ask them, did you like this work? And they will say yes, or they may say no, right? So, but what do we mean by like? Or if I say, is this work excellent or poor? So what is poor and what is excellent? It will vary from student to student, right? Uh, a work which may be very poor for me, it may be good for the student. You may think that this work is very nice. So depending on what you are doing, you can choose either one of them. I mean, there's nothing wrong with choosing a subjective criteria, and uh, there are advantages of choosing an objective criteria. So subjectivity doesn't mean you should lead it out, you should rule it out, and you shouldn't let your students use their subjectivity. Rather, create ample space for them and create opportunities where they can use their subjectivity when they're assessing somebody's work. So maybe you can have a mix of both. There are uh, statements which are objective. At the same time, there are statements which are subjective. So subjectivity is not bad, and all objectivity is also not good. Then going to rubric, I believe all of us know what a rubric is. If you need a rubric to use, there will be plenty on Google. I believe most of us are using these rubrics, or they've used it at one stage or another of our teaching career. And I think rubrics are easier to use. Uh, so I won't be saying a lot about that. And once we reach that stage where we need to apply this grading strategy, then I'll give you more detail. If at this stage you are not clear what is a cumulative grading strategy, what's comments grading strategy, what's number of errors, and what's uh, rubric grading strategy. So once I reach that stage where the students need to apply this strategy, then I'll give you more details and you will be clearer about it. So going back to Moodle, so depending on the nature of the assignment, depending what you want, what kind of grading strategy you want your students to use for peer assessment, you can make a choice among these four strategies. Let's say at this stage I choose a cumulative, or I can choose a rubric, right? And this, remember this, and I'll come back to it. It will change certain things. It will change the assessment form. What you choose here will change the assessment form, and I'll show it to you how it affects the assessment form. So remember this point, and we will come back to it. And when you are setting up your own activity for your students, then you are clear how it behaves if you choose one of them, how it changes your assessment form. So keep it in mind. Now coming here, grade for submission. And if you click here, it says this setting specifies the maximum grade that may be obtained for submitted work. So if the student submit the work and then it is assessed, so what's the maximum for that? 80 or 100 or 70, you can make it 100, you can make it 50, it's up to you, right? And then from this 100, the student will get from other students what they have done and what is the quality of their work, or how are they assessed by their peers. Submission grade to pass. So normally in prep year, for example, we have 70, whereas in undergrad we have 50, right? Or you can set the bar high. So let's say 90. They should get 90 from their peer to pass this assessment. So it's purely up to you, right? Because it's a peer assessment, and you can use it as a classroom participation strategy. You may not use it as a summative grade. So it's up to you how you decide and what you are doing it for, right? What's the purpose of the activity? What learning outcomes are related to that activity? So if it's a high stake learning outcome activity, then you can assign a higher grade and a strict submission pass grade. But if it's a formative learning kind of activity, then probably you may consider this. So I leave it to your teacherly judgment, your course requirements, your learning outcomes, how you set it up. Then coming to grade for assessment, and if you remember in the Delenn, William, and at the beginning I said it's not a one-way process. Peer assessment is a two-way process. There is a benefit for the assessor and there is a benefit for the assessee, right? And this module takes care of both. So you submit your work, you get a grade for that. You assess your peer and you also get a grade for that. So this grade for assessment is that grade. So if I'm a student and I assess another student, then what is the maximum grade I'll get for this effort, for this activity of assessing my peer, right? And make sure that this grade is lower than this grade, because obviously doing my work should carry more weight than assessing somebody's work, right? So if there's 100 for submission and for the assignment, I think 20 is a rational uh, uh, part of it, right? 20 maximum for assessing somebody's work. Or if you want to reduce it, you can reduce it to 10, you can reduce it to 5, you can increase it to anything. Again, I leave it to your judgment and your prerogative, how what grade you want your students to get for assessing some other student. So these are the two important area. Number one, grading strategy. Number two, grade for submission. Number three, submission grade to pass, and then grade for assessment and assessment grade to pass. So let's say 20 is maximum and I want them to get 10. for the assessment grade to pass. And I'll show you how it works later on, why there should be a pass for assessment grade also. So the total for assessing others is 20, but to pass is 10. And it works in a particular way in Moodle. So I'll show you that later on. Now moving to submission settings. Submission means the student has completed the assignment and now needs to submit, right? And basically, these instructions are instructions for the assignment. So what you want them to do, right? What kind of task you want them to perform and present it for peer assessment. So all these instructions will go here, right? So you want them to write a critical paper on, let's say, consumer right? Just as an example. And then if you want it to be in this paper, right? So all these instructions, if you want them to do this and do that, right? Uh, don't be this kind of instructions for an assignment. So you can put all these instructions here in this area. Now coming to submission type, do you want them to submit online? What do we mean by online? Right now, this is an example of online submission. There is a window and I'm writing my work in this window. Or I've written maybe in a Word document and now I copy and paste from that Word document here. So this is online submission, online text, right? And if you want it to be compulsory, then you may check this box and now the student must write here. If they don't write here, their assignment is not submitted. Or you don't want online submission, you just want a Word file or a PDF file or a video file, then you choose, then you uncheck this one, you check this one, right? And when you check this one, now it has automatically become required. Or maybe you give them both options, right? Online text, they can produce online text, but they also need to submit some files, right? They might have been doing some field work where they needed to make some videos or they needed to make some charts. And now when they write a report on that field work here, they also need to submit those files. So then you click file attachment and you make it compulsory by checking this required, right? So maximum number of submission attachments, it's up to you. You want 1, you want 10, you want as many as you want, right? Currently, the default maximum is 7, right? Uh, so you can want 7 attachments. You can allow them to attach 7, right? But if you just want 1, you don't want a lot of attachments from them. So then keep the number to 1. So again, it depends. If they needed to submit 3 charts, then choose 3. Right? And submission attachment allowed file types. So what type of file type you want them to submit, and you can then limit it here. So you can choose from here, uh, right? All these file types. So you just want them to submit an audio file, then choose the audio file, and from the audio file you can then choose different other kind of files. But you just want them to submit a document, and this document should be a PDF document. So then you can choose from here these type of documents. So you can limit or you can restrict what type of file they submit. And if you don't do anything here, you do not choose and you do not restrict it, then they can submit anything they like. So you have left the option open for them, right? Then coming to maximum submission attachment size, this is by default 400 MB. It's better to keep it at this. Don't reduce it, because sometimes we don't know exactly what the file size will be. If you choose 10 KB and then the file is 100 MB, then the students will be coming to you and telling you, oh, I can't submit my file. So it's better to leave it default, and default currently in our Moodle is 400 MB. Late submissions, you want your students to submit late after the due date. If you want to allow late submissions, fine. If you don't want them to allow late submissions, then uncheck this one. In some courses, the late submission is allowed with certain deductions, whereas in other courses it is not allowed. So it depends on your personal approach and your course requirements. If you allow late submissions with deductions, then check this box. Now coming to assessment settings, So these assessment systems, remember, they are for the students who will be assessing the work. And currently, you see just a box where you can put a criteria or a checklist for your students or the instructions telling them how should they assess their peers. But this is not the whole story. I'll show you that this is much, you can do much more here. It's not just one box where you tell them do not give grade for late, for let's say for essay without a title, right? So this is one instruction for them, and then they will follow this instruction. And if an essay is without title, then they will not give them grade, or give 0 for assignments without a chart, right? Okay, so uh, as a good practice, I would say here in this part, put some general instructions for the students. You can put more specific instructions in the assessment form, which I'll be showing you a little while later. So again, remember this, remember the grading strategy, how it affects the assessment form, and remember the assessment form where you can provide more specific and accurate criteria for assessing the peers in that form. So this sorry, it's here, assessment settings, yeah. So this one is just basic, right? Then you want to allow your students to use self-assessment. That is also possible. So if you want them to assess themselves, so just check this box, and then the students will also be able to assess their own work. So maybe you do it as a dual activity. The student assess themselves and they assess somebody's work. Or first they assess somebody's work, then they assess their own work. Or first they assess their own work and then they assess somebody's work. So think pedagogically about it, uh, what you want them to do and how it can benefit them, how it can benefit their, as Delanne Williams says, internalization of learning. So then you can make a decision. You want them to self-assess, or you don't want them to self-assess, or you want them to self-assess themselves first, and then they can assess somebody else. So I leave it to your pedagogical judgment again. Feedback. This is for the students who will be assessing each other. So oral feedback mode, right? Enabled and optional, right? Are enabled and required. Obviously, when you say enabled and required, now the students need to provide some general feedback as a comment, right? If you do not enable it, right, uh, then the student will not be able to provide a general feedback as a comment, right? So what I do, can make it optional. So if they want, they can provide a feedback in a window like this, or if I say enabled and required, then they must provide a feedback. If they don't provide a feedback, they will not get anything from this grade for assessment, right? So whatever you do uh, here, the assessment settings, and here, inform your students before they do this activity or they write their assignment, right? So it's always important to create this form and share it with students, all the criteria, all the instructions, all the checklists before they write their own assignment and before they assess somebody's assignment, right? The best way or the compulsory way is to share it with them even before they write their own assignment, because obviously then their assignment will be judged according to this criteria. And if they don't have access to this criteria, then it's a problem, right? So here, enable and required are enabled and optional are disabled. You can also disable it if you are using a rubric here, here in the assessment form, which I'll be showing you. If you are using a rubric, if you are using a checklist, and you don't want them to give a general feedback, then disable it, right? But it's always good as an additional activity and as a more engagement and as a deep thinking and deep learning to make it enabled and required. So they not only use the rubric, but they also give some kind of feedback, because we know our students, if there's a rubric or a checklist, they may just mechanically tick on different check boxes and they may not even think about it, right? But if they need to provide a feedback, in comment as a comment, then they will be thinking about it, because now they will be accountable for that comment, right? So just not think of the technical side, but also think of the pedagogical strategy, the psychological strategy, what you want to do with these areas, right? Maximum number of overall feedback attachments. So maybe you ask the students to attach a Word document as a feedback. You give them a form which they need to complete after the assessment, and peer assessment or checking the assignment of a fellow student, and then they need to submit it. So then you can allow the submissions one file, and then from here you can allow what kind of submission they make. So let's assume that you don't want them to submit to use a checklist or a rubric. You just want them to engage with the work of their fellow student and then prepare a video feedback for that student. So then from here you can choose a video file uh, here, and then what they do, they engage with the work of their fellow student, prepare a video here or on their mobile, and then they upload it for the student for you to watch and do that, right? And then you can, as I said, don't change the file size, let it be default 400 MB. Then coming to conclusion. So once the activity is complete, this workshop is complete, everything is done, graded, all done, what kind of message you want to go to your student, what you want to tell them as a closing, as a concluding remark? So you can write some kind of remark here. Well done. It was good feedback from all of you, and I can see a lot of, let's say, intelligent comments, right? And when they are finished, then they get this message, all of them. So you can think of a message for yourself. Then example submissions. Sometimes the student don't know what kind of submissions they need to make, right? Or they're doing this work for the first time, they don't have a model, they've never done it before. Or you can give this example submission as a sort of model. This is the bar. Whatever work you produce, it should be something like this, right? So you can then, for example, they need to make a statistical chart, and then you give them an example statistical chart, right, which they grade, and they know what kind of chart is needed from them and what kind of grading that they need to do for that chart. So here, before they assess each other's work, you give them an example submission, provide an example submission, and they assess that example submission. So as a sort of everything is moderated and everybody is at the same page and knows what kind of work to expect from others, and then what kind of. So it's a sort of exercise where students assess an example, see an example before they actually engage into the assessment activity, peer assessment activity. So mode of example assessment, right? Uh, is it voluntary, right? Must be assessed before on submission, are available after submission, and must be assessed before peer assessment. So what you want them to do, right? You just want to provide them an example. If some of them want to do it, they can do it. If some of them don't want to do it, they don't do it. Or you really, you make it compulsory for them, so then you can choose from here, right? Uh, Availability, the deadlines, right? When, and this is important, as I said, always keep a good gap between the submission deadline and then the assessment deadline. There should be a good time available to the students to submit. And even after submission, it shouldn't be a hurried business where they just take 10 minutes, assess somebody's work, and submit it to you. Give them good time, because now we are looking at deep learning. We are looking at critical thinking, right? They should really engage with that work. So, and then they're getting a grade for that. So it's not fair that you give them just 5 minutes and then they can't engage with the work properly, and it's a damage on both sides, the assessor as well as the assessee. So if I'm assessing somebody's work and there's not enough time for me, I will not learn for myself, and I'll not be able to provide good feedback. So as a good pedagogical practice, always keep a gap between the submission and the deadline for the assessment, and you can set all these deadlines here. If you don't want to set any deadline, then just don't click here, right? Don't add any, keep it as an active activity, open activity. Just give them a verbal instruction that you need to finish this assessment by the beginning of next week, that is Monday. So it's purely up to you how you do it. If it is in a class and if it's quick classroom activity, then obviously you can adjust your timing of submission and the timing of assessment according to that. So if I'm asking them to write something in the classroom and the class is 2 hours, they need to submit the written work after 1 hour, and then they need to spend another 30 minutes assessing somebody's work. So I can then adjust this timing, these deadlines accordingly. But if it is a more sort of longer work, I give them a week to do the work. So first 4 days, they do their own work and submit it. And the next 2 days, then they need to assess the work of somebody else. Then I can set these dates, these deadlines accordingly. These 4 areas, as usual, we do not need to do anything here because currently they are not part of our Moodle architecture. So no need to change anything here, just leave them as they are. And as a final step, as you always do, save and return to the course, right? And the workshop should be there on your course page. So let's see if it's there or not. It's here, right? And what you did now, you completed the first phase of the setup phase, right? When the workshop is there and now the students can start working on it. Now let's see how does it look. So your work is not finished. Unlike other activities where you just create a link, you just create a quiz and your work is finished. Remember, in this workshop module, your work has just started. You created a link for yourself and for your students to work on your course page. So now what happens? Click here and we see all these 4 stages, right? And you need to be available and doing something as a teacher during all these 4 stages. So what do we see here now? We see these 4 stages here: setup phase, submission phase, assessment phase, grading, evaluation, close. Even if you don't have to do anything here, you need to enable these different phases according to the deadline, right? So you have set up the workshop and you can see across here. So this is done, right? Now you need to provide instructions for submission if you haven't provided them already. So the assignment is set and now you didn't provide the instructions before. So now you want to provide instructions. Click here and it will take you back to this page, right? And now you can provide in this submission settings, you can provide these instructions, right? And if you are, you can make changes. And if they are provided, then you save and return to the course. And now you will see that this part should appear as a, sorry, I went to the wrong page, as a tick if it is done. So this one is done, but it is gray. This one is not done. So now let's move and see how to edit assessment form. And this is what I was emphasizing earlier. So click here and you see the different form, right? And now you see criteria 1, right? You can add a description here. What kind of criteria? If the assessment meets this criteria, then what kind of grade distribution, right? When is it 0, right? And this is related to rubric. When is it 1? When is it 2? When is it 3, right? If you want to increase the weight for this criterion, then you can change it from here, right? You can change it from here. You can change it from here, right? So you're using a rubric in which there's the first criterion is there must be statistical charts. And what kind of statistical charts? Then you further define them. The minimum are something which is not acceptable, and the maximum something which is acceptable, or which moves from poor to excellent. So then you can provide all these areas. And if we are talking about rubric, right? So this works in this way. If I share with you any rubric, let me open a rubric. So you see a rubric here. So this is my first criterion, focus and detail, right? So this criterion 1 is focus and detail. Now what is the first? Right? The first is for poor, the topic and main ideas are not clear. So I take it and I put it here, and the students get a 0 or 1 for this, right? And you can then do a little bit of formatting. The second one, there is one topic, main ideas are somewhat clear, right? And then you put it there, and if the students work meet this criteria, this description, then they get 5 for it. And then you can take this one, you can put it here, and then you can take the excellent one, which will get 4, and you can put it here, right? So this is criterion 1. Then criterion 2, you can add the same, you can choose the second description, organization, right? Suppose you are evaluating something, you want the students to evaluate something for organization also, and then you can start from here, and you can keep on adding these to these areas, right? Criterion third, and you can add more criterion from here, right? So now instead of just 3, we got 5 up to 5, and you can keep on increasing them. As you see, after 5 even we can have more, right? And rubric configuration, how you want it to appear as a list or as a grid. This is an example of grid, and it can also appear as a list from up to from top down. This is the example of list, right? And then you can go here and you can save and continue editing if you want to add something more, or you can just save and close, right? So you added a criteria, and this is what we call assessment form. It's telling me because I need to add something here, right? At least one level is required. So I need to add something here. So it's not allowing me to finish it, but I can cancel it, simple, right? Now let me explain something here. I said grading strategy and the assessment form. How the change in grading strategy affects this assessment form. Here, I choose the grading strategy of cumulative grade rubric, and here the assessment form appeared as a rubric, right? Now what happens if I choose another type of assessment strategy from one of these 4 strategies, that is a cumulative grading strategy, number of errors, right? Or comments, right? Or rubric, how it affects. So I need to change that. Let's go here, set the workshop description, and then we go to the grading, right? And it was rubric. I want it to be a cumulative grading, right? Now let me save it and then see how it changes the assessment form. So I click here and let's see how the assessment form has changed now. And now you can see you need to provide aspect 1. So some description, it can be the same thing. But now we are not using a rubric. Maybe now we are using just this area of rubric, this first grade, or maybe we are just using these main traits. So focus and detail, right? So this, and it's a little bit, can be a little bit subjective. So the students think there's enough focus and detail. If the students think uh, yes, then they can provide the grade accordingly, 10, right? Uh, and here you can choose a scale or you can choose a grade, right? So the weight, right, can be 9. The weight means from all these traits, how much weight you want to assign them. So I want this one to be 10, but this one is important, so I want it to be 20. 10, 20. This one voice is not very important, so I want it to be 5. Word choice, oh, it's a maths assignment. It's not important word choice, so just 1, right? And sentence and structure and grammar, because this is English, so it should be very high, so 20, right? And then from here, I can choose that weight accordingly, right? So this one, it's not very important for me, focus and detail, so I choose 5. But the second one is grammar, and it's an English assignment, so I want it to be with maximum weight, and I choose 15, right? So this is, when we are talking about cumulative grading, then this criteria will apply. Now let me show you uh, the third one, which is error, right? So instead of accumulative grading, I choose number of errors, right? And number of errors will now be yes or no criteria, right? So I save it, and then I see how it changes my assessment form, right? So you will see the change in the assessment form now. Okay, and now assertion 1, right? Focus and detail is present, right? If yes, okay, and if no. So if yes, word for success, and it is not present, so no. So the student then will choose just from these two, right? And how much weight? The same. If it is like of less weight, you can assign it just less, but you think it's very important, then you can assign it more weight, depending on how you look at these different uh, traits or characteristics or categories, right? So one more, uh, if I choose comment, then how this area appears, right? So from here, grading strategy is comment. So I choose comments. The student need to comment. Now let's see how it changes the assessment form, right? So click here, assessment form. So now you can provide some kind of description to the student, make this kind of comments or make comments on this thing. So make uh, comments on grammar, for example, right? Or make comments on the use of statistics. Okay. So anything, and then the students will follow that, right? So what's happening? Let me explain a little bit more. There are three things. There is a grading strategy, and there is an assessment form, and there are instructions for assessment. Instructions for assessment are very general, right? Grading strategy will determine what kind of assessment form appears for you to edit. And then you can provide specific instructions to your students there in the form of a rubric. Now, rubrics are more objective, though it's debatable. I always debate it with my colleagues how objective they are, right? How objective their application is. But we assume that they are objective, right? So the students have no choice but to choose from these 4 areas. Okay, so they will think that a particular work is either 1 or 4 or 2 or 3. So there's no room for uh, sort of subjectivity. But you want them to be subjective, then choose the comment kind of grading strategy, and the student just need to comment. They will not assign even a grade, right? So what kind of grading you want them to do, and that grading will then determine what kind of form you choose. But to choose a particular form, you need then to change the grading strategy from here. And if you, for example, if you want them to use comments, but you choose rubric, now these two things don't go with each other, and you'll be using a rubric assessment for comment, and the student will not be able to comment, right? So choose the right grading strategy, and then it will give you the right kind of form. So you want your students just to comment, it will give you the form, assessment form there for comment, to the students for comment, right? So that is the important of these 3 areas. If you have any question about this, you can ask. Now, when this is set up, then you can go and let me save just a form so we can see that, or I'll show you save and close. So now when I've set up my form, you can see the green tick. It means this one is done. Now prepare example, because I selected there, or I didn't select probably prepare example, so it's not working. But if there was a prepare example, it would become interactive, and I would be able to use it. So currently, because I didn't choose make the option here, about select an example, so I cannot edit it, right? It was here, example submission, right? So this option is not allowing me because it's voluntary, so I do not need to provide uh, one, but if I make it one of them, so then that area will become interactive, and then I need to provide some kind of example there. Okay. But still it's not allowing me, so it means something is missing here. But let's move to this one, switch to the next phase, right? So this was the administrative area, you did your job. Now you, after setting up all these areas, you allow your students to submit. So when you click here, switch to the next phase, right? uh, Sorry, one thing which I just saw and I forgot about it, you can add example for submission from here. So once I add it, then this area will become interactive and I'll be able to click. But currently I didn't add any example, so it's not working. So if you want to add an example, then do it from here and this will become green, and then you can move here, right? So I was saying, switch to the next phase where the students can submit their assignment, click here, and now this area will become interactive, and the students will be able to do things and you will be able to do things. So provide instructions for assessment, we already did this. Allocate submissions. So when you need to do this, when your students have submitted their work, right? So let's say I got 4 students, they submitted their work. In this course I have 5, and I can see here uh, so I have 5 students registered in this course. So expected sub is 5, submitted is 0, allocated is 0, right? So no work submitted, so obviously it will show me. But let's assume that somebody has submitted, all of them have submitted their work. So then we can go from here and we can allocate them to each other. So either I can do random allocation or I can do a scheduled allocation, right? So in random allocation, then the system will allocate my work to somebody, right? And they will be able to assess that. So I don't need as to do anything as a teacher, but I can allocate student A to student B, and that for that then I need to do it from manual allocation. So I want Adina to assess Sham's work, then I do need to do it manually. Currently I can't do it because no submissions are made. You can see no submission found. So but if there were submissions, I would have been able to allocate Adina's work to either one of the rest of the students. You want to do random allocation, then you just click here, you determine number of reviewers. So for Adina, I can have more than one reviewer. Then I can choose from here. She should get 2 reviewers for each submission. And then I can save the changes here. I can also ask them to self-assess herself, and participants can assess without having submitted anything, right? So, but as a punishment, don't allow them to assess somebody without submitting. First, they need to submit, then they will need to assess. So you can make one of these choices here, then you save the changes and you go there, right? Scheduled allocation, you can assign a date, right? So automatically allocate submission at the end of the submission phase. So if you have set the deadlines, so then automatically once the deadline is gone, the next phase will start and the students will be allocated to each other automatically. So you don't need to do anything, you just need to set the date, and then from here probably you need to choose how many reviewers each student get. Uh, Depending on the time and the nature of assessment, you can allocate more than one student to assess a single work, right? It's your choice. You can save it and return to the course, okay? And then you can continue. So now you have done the uh, allocation part, right? And sorry, let me go. It didn't do the function because there are no assessment submissions, so it doesn't do unless certain things are done. So then once I've done this, you will also see a green here. And from here, then you can switch to the next phase. And the next phase is, if you click here, so what is phase 2? Phase 2 is submissions. The students have submitted their work, you have allocated them for review, right? And now they start the review or the assessment phase, and they assess each other's work. The details will appear here. And once everybody has assessed and the deadline is gone, now you can move to the next phase. The next phase is grading evaluation. So if you want to override certain grades or you want to calculate grades, then you can do it from here. Right in this phase, every time you click on something, you will see some action there. You may need to uh, make certain checks, right? Choose certain options. And once this is done, so then close of workshop, you click here and the student get the message that you provided them, well done, all of you did a good job, right? And kind of thing. So again, a summary of what these different phases. In phase 1, you set up the workshop, you provide instructions for submissions, you did the assessment form depending on your grading strategy, and then in the stage 2, the students submit, you allocate reviewers, they review each other's work here, and you will see the details here, and then finally the grades appear here. And I'll show you the example of grades. Also, excuse me. So you can see here, these students have assessed each other, right? And in the case of this student, Frances Banks, she got, right, a 0 from this assessor. From Lau, she got a 0. This assessor thought her work is not worth it, and he gave her a 0. But from Maria, she got 26, and from Thomas, she got 26, and from Peter, she got 53. So her work was assigned to 4 students, and these students gave her these different grade, and the average of this grade from a total of 80 is 26, right? Uh, but then she assessed other students, and she assessed Thomas' work. She gave him a 0. She assessed David's work. She gave him a 80. She assessed Eric's work. She gave him a 80. And she assessed this guy's work. Sorry, she gave him 20, 20, 20, 13. She got it for assessing these 4 guys. Now, why she got 20 here for assessing this guy, and why she got 13 here for assessing Gary? The reason is that the grade for assessing somebody depends on how much grade you give to that student, right? And then the Moodle has an internal formula where it works out. So if you give a grade of 20, then this 20 may affect the grade that you get for assessment. It works out a kind of average. If you need detail, I'll send it to you sometimes how it works, or you can Google it. So how you grade somebody will also affect what grade you receive for that student's work. And it works out a strategy and every strategy, and based on that average, then the student from all these averages 20, 20, 13, 13, the students get an 18 out of 20 for assessing somebody's work. So this is the student's grade, average grade for her work, and this is the average grade of the student for assessing others' work, right? So this is how it works, and this is how the grade appears. And following all these 4 stages, right? So to start with, just try playing with it. If you don't want your students to see what you are doing in your course, you can create an activity there and hide it from your students so they don't see it and they don't do anything. And now you can play with it, right? You can watch some, you can ask me if you're not sure about something, you can Google something, you can watch some YouTube videos, you can create some, add some fake students some faculty members or colleagues to your course as students, and then you ask them to do this activity, and you will see how it behaves, what different stages you need to do, and start with simple, formative, simple, basic assessment. Don't do something graded. So once you get a hang of it, then you can use it with your students, and from there, then you can include it in your everyday or weekly teaching and learning activities. So that was it. At least you got introduced. Now you know what different things mean. And if you want your students to engage in peer assessment, then you know what to use from Moodle, how to set it up, and what are the different stages, how the assessment grade works, how to set up a rubric there for your students, how to set up a checklist there for your students, how to set up comments for your students, and all these things. So now, coming back to you, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Uh, and if you have no questions, then we can wind it up.
Hi, Hamid. This is Sultana. Thank you so much
Hi,
for
Sultana.
teaching us. Learning a lot, actually, through these workshops. Are you teaching right now in Marine?
Unfortunately, this year, I'm not teaching any course.
Oh.
I expect to teach a course next year.
Okay.
Yeah, so that is the thing I miss.
Okay, I was just
Yeah.
wondering if anyone is in Marine right now using these strategies and how it's actually working with students. If they can share their,
Actually, I used it with my students. It all depends on how you present something to your students, how you engage them, how you motivate them. I used it once with my students and it worked very well, because number one, they get multiple feedbacks, right? Not just from one student. You can assign 3 reviewers or 4 reviewers to them, and they can review each other's work. Then obviously, when I'm looking at somebody's work, then I learn myself. And finally, even as a teacher, after all these reviews, you ask them to now submit a final work based on that review, right? And when they submit the final work, then you grade them. And obviously now this work will be better than if they submit it without peer assessment. So
Yeah.
that is also the advantage. So as I said, use your teacher imagination and see how it works. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Rosa, you wanted to say something? If you can turn your mic on and please comment.
Hello, everyone. And thank you very much for this. Actually, I already did this online. Last week we talked about that, and I played around with all these functions. I realized that before this online teaching and learning, I was using a few functions in the Moodle. Now I'm adding more and more. And regarding this peer editing or peer review, we use it in our prepare a lot, right? In our curriculum. Usually I study is like open class peer evaluation because students coming from traditional classrooms and they don't want to show their papers to each other. It's a losing face, and then after they see the value of peer assessment or peer evaluation, then they start. This kind of using this track writing. And one thing that I wanted to mention that personally I like this open class peer assessment because when you project if student projects the paper on a screen, everybody learn from each other while giving a feedback to someone's work. They see their mistakes, their errors in their papers. So then of course I assign like peer evaluation as well. But in my class, I saw the benefits of this open class assessment.
Yeah, thank you, Rosa. Definitely. And coming back to Sultana's question, I'm thankful she asked this question. Actually, there are teaching strategies. Sometimes, and most of the time, we stand in front of class and teach them. But it's outdated now. So why not to break the monotony? Rather than teaching them, we ask them to do things themselves. And then we engage them in peer review, right? And after the peer review, they do the assignment. So rather giving the assignment straight away, okay, this is the assignment, submit it tomorrow, and then you will get grade A, B, C, right? Why not to first walk them through the process? They know the good sides and the bad sides of their assignment. Then they do a final assignment and submit it. Actually, coming back to Rosa and Sultanat again, going back to my teaching practice, when I came to Nareen and Rosa and I was teaching a course, uh, the course designers told us, this is the assignment, give it to the students, they do it, you grade it, right? But then I realized that we grade it and the students never read our comments. So what's the point of then commenting, giving them feedback? If number one, they don't read it because they think once they got the grade, so the story has finished, they cannot do anything. So then what I started during 2018 and 19 teaching year, I started the strategy of delayed grade. So you do the assignment, you give it to me, I give you my feedback, but without grade. You do it again, include the feedback, then you submit it to me. And now if I'm happy that you have read my feedback, you have understood it, you have included it in your assignment, now I give you a grade, right? So I used it as a teaching strategy and it was very successful. So it's up to you as a teacher how you use different things. So you got a tool, peer assessment, you got a tool in Moodle, how you use it with your students. Maybe you come up with some inventive use of this peer assessment tool workshop. Yes, Rosa. Yeah. Turn on your mic, Rosa, please.
Yes, I also use this multi-stage assessment. Like first, as you said, without any grades, and then they, after my feedback, they will, improve their papers. Also, I have this. Now I put like bonus after they submit, and they get their grades. They also can earn 5 points, making revision, and then they will earn 5 points. Our students still like grade driven, right? So if you tell them you will earn 5 grades if you use this self-assessment or peer assessment. So it's also another strategy I use in my class.
Yeah. And then the good thing is, through this workshop, what happens? The student has read 2 more works in addition to their own work. So basically, they got engaged with 3 works. And they also got feedback from 2 other people. So now they got 2 models of other students and they got feedback from 2 students. And now they are better prepared to do something. So grade necessarily need not to be there. It's a just use it as a learning strategy without any grade or with a formative grade or as a classroom participation grade. And Sultanat, if you want to have more discussions on that, then we can talk on team. And if you want more colleagues to participate in this discussion as a community of practice, as a teaching learning debates, then that will be a great idea where colleagues from Khorog and colleagues from Nareen, we can join on a team and share with each other students. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I think that would be great. And especially I'm kind of, I'm working with Ayan. I'm attending actually Ayan and Nurlan's classes right now since they're teaching science and ecology classes that I taught here. And we've been talking about how we're gonna try to improve also online classes since we don't know this uncertainty, what's gonna happen in the fall semester.
Exactly.
We're gonna get back to normal or not. So we're trying, and I think it would be helpful. I think for off-campus faculty to learn from Naryn campus. So maybe we can have some, if they have some time to share their experience, and if anyone used your tools that you have shared, as Rosa mentioned, I also have been only using few things on Moodle, but now learning, and hopefully I'll be doing more practices to get better.
No, definitely. I mean, definitely. Anytime you feel like bothering me, Ayan, Rosa, Ayan is the best person to work with. So please do that. We can also get Ayan online, talk together, and develop our techniques and our ways of teaching. Then For example, science, you are doing lab reports. The students need to submit some research papers, process paragraph, the process report. So why not to walk them through before giving them a grade through this peer assessment? And Ayn is also a good teacher. We work together. He knows us, we know him, and then we can share all these experiences with each other. So that will be a great idea. So just talk to Ayn, and then all of us can get together at on some day, some time, and we will be glad to discuss these ideas. Yes, Barfia. Yeah.
Hi, Amit. Thank
Hi.
you so much. It was so easily explained, so I learned a lot.
My pleasure.
I'm
Yeah.
interested if what Saltanat asked about if did someone have the experience to share. So if there is, you guys decide to organize a team again and talk about it, I'm also so much interested
Yes.
to participate and learn more about it.
No, definitely, definitely. I mean, we will also include you. So let's make Sultanat a coordinator, sort of calling these people, setting a meeting, and then we can be there. The good thing about UCA is that it gives you a lot of freedom to experiment in the classroom. So why not to use it? Why not to use this liberty to the benefit of our teaching practice and to the benefit of the learning of the students? So definitely, it will be a great idea if we can get together, we can talk, share ideas, and learn from each other. And this is also the spirit of interdisciplinarity, where we don't live in our silos, thinking, oh, I'm English, so I shouldn't talk to science, and I'm science, I shouldn't talk to maths, and I'm maths, so I shouldn't talk to computer science. We can cross each other's boundaries. We can take each other's practices. We can look at the good things that is happening in science. Science can look at the good things that is happening in the with the English faculty. And I'm really happy that both of you are open to these ideas and you want to experiment and you want to share and learn from others. This is how the spirit of the university faculty should be. We are knowledge sharers, we are knowledge producers. We need to build new knowledge. We need to share our experiences with other people. So I'm really uh, happy that you got this spirit and you are looking to doing new things and learning new things. So that's a good start. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you so much. Actually, I'm doing what you said about multi-time assessment. I work with prep students and I always assess their lab reports before Maksad grades them. So I
Right.
give feedbacks and they find it really helpful. They say it helped a lot to improve their writing skills.
Great, great. Rather, let's be the pioneers of this practice, discussing things and uh, initiating some debates of teaching and learning, the English and the science team, and I'm sure the others will follow. So
Yeah,
thank you very much. Yeah.
thank you
So
so much.
Thanks,
yeah,
Hamid.
yeah.
Thank
So
you.
thank you very much. Rather, I took more time than it was initially assigned. It was supposed to finish in 1 hour and 15 minutes, but thank you for your patience and thanks for your interest and enthusiasm. Thanks for your suggestions and sharing your ideas. So see you in future sometimes. All the best. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you so much,
Bye bye.
Hamid. Yeah,
Bye bye.
stay
Bye
so
bye.
safe and healthy. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Same.
Bye.